Katerina Jakob watched the German soldiers flee. Streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them. She thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Jakob saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies has never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review. This is Chris Driscoll, and along with me is Rainer Shea. Tonight, we have a full plate for you, but I'll start off just by asking Rainer, how you doing, buddy?
I just got banned from Medium.
Medium.
Yeah, it was the blogging that I primarily used.
Yeah, it's like an aggregator of people's news items and opinion pieces and so forth. Yeah, a lot of people use it, and you're one of them. But why did you get banned this time?
Yeah,
this is your second time, right?
I used to be one of the people who used it until I got banned this afternoon. I'm guessing for either my recent calling the regime in Ukraine, the NATO-backed regime in Ukraine, a Nazi government, or
which it is,
my repeated challengings of the CIA narrative on Xinjiang, that there's a genocide there, or simply my general promotions of militancy.
Yeah, well, I don't know. This is we're just gonna have to keep on going. You know, it's good that you have RainerShea.com, because they can't ban you from that. Right? And by the way, you can get all Rainer's articles on RainerShea.com. So screw Medium. I've never used it myself. You know, I mean, I use more traditional aggregators like I don't know, like for instance, what was it called? Counterpunch.org or something like that. That's a little bit more traditional. Anyway, they're all about the same, all those aggregators. Let's move on to the first topic, which is one by me, or at least it's a review of articles by me, but the articles are by someone else. Notably, first of all, just the title. The title is The Triumphant Defeat of Socialism in Afghanistan. And yes, the American empire played a decisive role. Now, first, I'm going to go to an article by the noted let's just get it up here. The noted Australian investigative reporter. His name is John Pilger, and John Pilger writes a rather stirring article or commentary on his time in Afghanistan during the period of the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan, which was from 1978 to 1992. That was when the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan ran the government. They ran it after a revolution that brought the end to the overthrow of a dictatorship by the dictator was Mohammed Dawood, the cousin of King Zaire Shah, who had been deposed in 1973, and he ran the country until 1978. And the upshot of it is, anyway, I'll start with, in 1978, a liberation movement led by the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan overthrew the dictatorship of the Mohammed Dawood, the cousin of King Zaire Shah. It was immensely a popular revolution that took place in British and took British and Americans by surprise. Foreign journalists in Kabul, reported the New York Times, were surprised to find that nearly every Afghan they interviewed was delighted with the coup. The Wall Street Journal reported that 150 persons marched to honor the new flag. The participants appeared genuinely enthusiastic. The Washington Post reported that Afghan loyalty to the government can scarcely be questioned. Secular, modernist, and to a considerable degree socialist, the government declared a program of visionary reforms that included equal rights for women and minorities. Political prisoners were freed and police files publicly burned. Under the monarchy, life expectancy was 35. 1 in 3 children died of infancy. 90% of the population was illiterate. The new government introduced free medical care. A mass literacy campaign was launched. For women, the gains had no precedent. By the late 1980s, half of the university students were women. Women made up 40% of the Afghan doctors, 70% of its teachers, and 30% of its civil servants. So the radical changes that remained, so for the United States, the problem with the PDPA government was that it was supported by the Soviet Union. Yet it was never the puppet derided in the West. Neither was it the coup against the monarchy, Soviet-backed, as the American and British press claimed at the time. President Jimmy Carter, Secretary of State President Jimmy Carter's Secretary of State, Cyrus Vance, later wrote in his memoirs, "We had no evidence of any Soviet complicity in the coup." In the same administration, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Carter's national security advisor, a Polish emigre and fanatically anti-communist and moral extremist whose enduring influence on American presidents expired only with his death in 2017. On 3 July 1979, unknown to the American people and Congress, Carter authorized a 500 million, that's half of a billion, covert action program to overthrow Afghanistan's first secular pop progressive government. This was codenamed by the CIA Operation Cyclone. The 500 million bought, bribed, and armed a group of tribal and religious zealots known as the Mujahideen. Recruited from all over the Muslim world, America's secret army was trained in camps in Pakistan run by the Pakistani intelligence, the CIA, and the British MI6. Others were recruited at the Islamic College of Brooklyn, New York, within sight of the Twin Towers. One of the recruits was a Saudi engineer called Osama bin Laden. The aim was to spread Islamic fundamentalism in Central Africa and destabilize, eventually destroy the Soviet Union. In August 1979, the US Embassy in Kabul reported that the United States' larger interests would be served by the demise of the PDA government. This is the part in italicized, despite whatever setbacks that might mean for the future social and economic reforms in Afghanistan. Read again the words I have italicized, says Pilger. It is not often that such cynical intent is spelt out so clearly. The US was saying that a genuinely progressive Afghan government and the rights of Afghan women could go to hell. 6 months later, the Soviets made their fatal move into Afghanistan in response to the American-created jihadi threat at their doorstep. They were invited to do so by the Afghani government, who was coming under increasing pressure from these jihadis that the Americans had created. Anyway, he goes on in this vein, but well, let's just go a little bit farther. In 1980s, oh, wait a sec. Yeah, anyway, and throughout the 1980s, Afghanistan continued to be a strikingly progressive place with everything that we in America want, like free education, free medical care, other areas like that we in the United States, the richest country in the world, don't have, for like free higher education, I mean. During that entire time, the Soviet Union and the Afghani military fought against the Taliban and what later became the Al Qaeda, which were funded, armed, directed by the CIA. This is all public knowledge. So if it comes as any surprise to any of you, I'm sure most that are listening to this show, it doesn't come to any surprise to you. But if it comes to any surprise to any of you, there are thousands and thousands of documents documenting this very thoroughly and fully. It is well orchestrated, well documented. And what we've got here, in the end, and by 1989, the Soviets were driven out of Afghanistan, but the Afghan government still held on for 3 long years after that, until the Taliban were finally able to drive them out. And it was a time that people even today in Afghanistan look back on fondly, look back on with a lot of, and you'll hear that, oh, the people were really backwards. No, this is not true. Afghanis, by and large, except maybe a 10 or 15% minority of religious nuts, were fully on board with this kind of progressive agenda. But the American government was not on board with this progressive agenda, and that's what counted. That's what drove the United States to push out the socialist government, which was not a puppet in any way, shape, or form of the Soviet Union, but which did come to rely on the Soviet Union to save them, to help save them anyway. Obviously, in the end, they were able to do it alone for the last 3 years of their existence. Anyway, that's just a little bit of a story about Afghanistan during another time, another place. And we're going to go and hear some comments from Rainer. And then Rainer is going to go into part 2 of our series on Afghanistan. The US empire reacts to Afghanistan loss with brutality and terror, which was published on RainerShay.com August 25th. And it is, which is, and it is the, well, it's quite a good article too. So first, Rainer, what did you think of my article, and then on to number 2, your article?
I saw that John Pilger article. He drew the connection to Tony Blair, who's now paid £1 million a year by this United Arab Emirates development organization that has a plan to mine $1 trillion worth of the minerals within Afghanistan. So now Blair has been denouncing the troop withdrawal, and the US media has been framing it as if the Taliban are hoarding, unfairly hoarding somehow these minerals. That was the infamous headline this last week. The Taliban is sitting on $1 trillion worth of minerals that the rest of the world desperately needs. It's so transparent, as is the headline from the Washington Post that said, the new Mujahideen resistance to the Taliban begins now, but we need help. Probably written by some disingenuous US puppet within Afghanistan. Remember what happened the last time the US funded the Mujahideen? They turned back the clock. They destabilized Afghanistan, and the consequences were really horrendous. It's almost incomprehensible for us in the United States what's considered a very liberal country, what befell Afghanistan, where after they had this secular progressive government, it immediately switched to the rule of the Mujahideen, who then became the Taliban, under which women were regularly beaten on the street for infractions like not being accompanied by a male guardian. This is Saudi Arabia level atrocities and repression. So now Afghanistan is kind of back to square one after 20 years of the U.S. Supposedly nation building in there, supposedly trying to win the freedom of the Afghanistan women. And the only way that Afghanistan's women, Afghanistan's other people are going to gain freedom is through a reversal of the counter-revolution that the Mujahideen, with the backing of the United States, carried out within the country. And I'm going to have to keep looking for updates on the potential development of a communist insurgency within Afghanistan.
The one thing that I wanted to add was this is an example. This example of the United States trampling all over any socialist experiment anywhere in the world. This is another example of the same thing that we've been talking about in other places, anywhere, and I mean anywhere, where people try a socialist as opposed to a capitalist form of economy. In other words, a real democratic economy, because a socialist economy means the working class is in charge, and the working class is the majority throughout much of the world now. Certainly in places like the United States. So that's the real bottom line here. No matter where we try, our enemies will come back at us without the velvet gloves, without the nice bringing democracy to us and all that bullshit that they try to make people think they're doing. It's when it comes down to it, it's naked aggression. And the only way we're going to stop it is eventually by stopping them, by stopping the imperialists who carry this stuff out, the imperialists who are led by the American capitalist ruling class, to be followed in puppy dog fashion very closely by the UK capitalist ruling class, and then the ruling classes of the lesser lights like Europe and Japan and the rest of the Anglophile world, the Australia and New Zealand, places like that. So it's a fight worldwide. It's a fight between us and them. There's no in between. There are lots of people who are in between, but those people who are in between, they're going to have to decide one way or another. Are you with us, with the working class, or are you with the capitalist class? The capitalist class is a lot smaller than us, and anybody who's not in the capitalist class doesn't get anything out of it. So next on the list, as I said before, the U.S. empire reacts to Afghanistan's loss with a brutality and terror. Rainer Shea.
As part of their renewed campaign for war against Afghanistan, where the imperialists, as I said, are manufacturing consent for some huge mineral theft and new terrorist proxy insurgency with the Mujahideen. The imperialists are trying to freeze Afghanistan's wealth. They've automatically expanded the existing sanctions on the Taliban to the entire country. And this comes at a time when Afghanistan is experiencing catastrophic homelessness, hunger, economic ruin, social crisis that is spiraling out of control very fast. And the equivalent is being done to places like Ethiopia, where the imperialists are tightening their cruel sanctions against the country at a moment when a new famine is emerging within the country. And the imperialists are rather dishonestly putting the Ethiopian government on equal footing with the TPLF, the terrorist organization that the imperialists have oddly refused to classify as a terrorist organization. This is similar to how in Afghanistan, in the case of Afghanistan's East Turkestan Islamic movement, last year the Trump administration took the East Turkestan Islamic movement, this Uyghur terror group, off of the US terrorist group watch list, claiming that there was no longer any evidence for them engaging in terrorism, even though in reality in this last year, directly as a result of Trump's taking it off the watch list, the ETIM has undergone a massive increase in its arms, logistics, manpower, and finance. And it's emerged as an increasing terror threat to China. So in places like Ethiopia and Afghanistan, Somalia, Libya, all of these parts of the global south that that have the potential to partner with China in developing infrastructure, the imperialists are deliberately manufacturing crises, perpetual chaos, destabilization through terrorist proxies, and economic strangulation in order to make these countries unfit for China to develop its infrastructure. It's essentially a game of the empire cutting its losses as the multipolar world rises by destroying even the neo-colonial states that it's built up, because the empire increasingly sees a world with less states as preferable to a world where states continue to exist in these places and where these states will therefore partner with China.
Yeah, the situation is quite dire for people in that country, in Afghanistan right now. The Taliban, I don't even know if they will hold on. We'll see. But for the time being, they are holding on. The G7 countries have put out a statement saying that they will give aid to the Afghan government, the new Afghan government, the Taliban government, if the Afghan government keeps to its promises to hold on to put behind it the worst of its excesses, like not allowing women to go to school, not allowing women to walk around without a male accompanying them, and in general that they not bring back the terrorists. That's the number one demand of the G7 nations. Of course, the G7 nations includes the United States. So, you know, in my opinion, that's just for posturing. They're never going to give the Taliban um, aid. The aid is much more likely to come uh, from China and Russia and Iran. And in those three countries, they've also made the same demands that the Taliban not bring back the terrorists first and foremost, the Al Qaeda, which right now Al Qaeda is active in Syria and in Libya. And in those two places, they're basically working for the American government. The American government gives them arms, funds. They do it surreptitiously, but it's pretty much in the open. So we'll see how that goes. We'll see how that goes. In any case, the next on the list is ALBA the ALBA movement, which is basically the pink tide, as they're called, socialist countries of South America, and it's a couple in Central America, basically El Salvador and Nicaragua. But it's El Salvador, Nicaragua, the Venezuela, a couple of other countries in South America, and ALBA, which is just the name of this movement of these countries, has put out an alert about a coup underway against the government of Pedro Castillo in Peru. It is calling for international solidarity, saying that saying that the basically that countries need to come together to put a stop to this. It's not a very long statement. It was put out on Sunday, August 22nd, 2021. And it's there's not a lot to add to it so far. We'll bring you more as it comes out, but it's pretty tough to get any information on this because of course, in America, it's by all American media, it's just basically blacked out. So there you have what we have so far. ALBA movement issuing an alert on a coup d'etat underway in the government of against the government of Pedro Castillo. And you'll recall that Rayner just a couple of weeks ago gave the report on Pedro Castillo's inauguration as president just about a month ago or so. So it's not very long into it, and they're already starting. The ALBA did mention that they're positive that this coup is coming from right-wing parties with fascist sectors and human rights violators.
Yeah, I wonder if this is going to be another Bolivia coup situation where within only a year, the masses following the coup have managed to reverse the coup. Because so far, the attempted coup by Castillo's fascist opponent, Fujimori, who was inflaming all of this racism and anti-communism, trying to paint the election results as illegitimate by painting the votes of the indigenous communities as illegitimate. I wonder if after this coup occurs, it's going to be another Bolivia situation where some kind of brutal junta may be able to hold on for a time, but where the masses ultimately prevail through relentless protests and blockades and armed struggle.
Yeah, it could be, very well could be. Pedro Castillo in Peru, he's in a kind of a shaky situation right now because he's brand new. And despite the fact that he was supported overwhelmingly by the electorate, the right wing in Peru is just as strong as it is in Bolivia, which means not really that strong. It represents 10 or 15% of the people, but it's strong because it has the backing of the United States. It's strong because it has the surreptitious or covert aid of the United States in carrying out its mission. So we'll see what we see. We'll see what we see with that. Meanwhile, next on the list is, let's see, loss of land and settler colonialism's violent reaction. August 23rd, 2021 by Rainer Shea.
There's this theme that I see recurring within dystopian science fiction where after an apocalypse has occurred, humanity is living in vastly reduced numbers and on far, far less land than it used to be able to access. We see this in the Hunger Games. We see this in Snowpiercer, where everyone is having to live on this little train after the whole world is frozen. And the nature of the ruling regimes within these post-apocalyptic fictional scenarios is always one of existential reaction, I would call it, to the fact that they only get to rule over a relatively minuscule number of human beings, and they have a relatively minuscule amount of land to rule over. So it's like they're compensating for this historical weakness by being as brutal as possible. And they use humanity's near extinction as an argument for the righteousness of their rule by claiming that only they have the authority to preserve humanity from total annihilation. It's this philosophy that I see going into colonialism at this stage of history, when the warming of the climate and the destruction of the biosphere are rapidly shrinking the amount of land that humanity can access, whether this is in terms of erosion of coasts due to oil and gas companies screwing up the land there, or sea level rise, or simply the making of not underwater land uninhabitable due to it becoming too hot, due to crops becoming unable to be grown. So you have this shrinking of the range within which humanity can function, and you have this situation where the reactionaries are reacting as they do in increasingly brutal fashions. You see how already there's this eco-fascism manifesting in the genocidal ICE policies against indigenous migrants who are coming up from the South due to US destabilization and climatic changes. And the reactionaries are punishing them for seeking refuge by putting them into notoriously inhumane camps and pepper spraying them, tear gassing them actually. You have all of these eco-fascist trends, even though paradoxically the reactionaries always tend to downplay the ecological issues for the sake of rhetoric. These are not intellectual people. They just react to the circumstances. They cannot grasp dialectical materialism because they view it as evil. And that's what makes them so dangerous. They're at the same time acutely reacting to the circumstances of capitalist collapse and climate doomsday, and also claiming that capitalism and the planet are still plenty strong, and there's nothing really to worry about in those departments. That's the absurdity, the madness of the capitalist reaction right now, and it ties in with settler colonialism's desire to grab up land for the sake of the white nation. As the land becomes scarcer, as resources become scarcer, settler colonialism is going to increasingly throw the colonized peoples under the bus. And we're seeing this in realities like, well, the fact that Black communities are statistically some of the most vulnerable people to floods. They live in more low-lying areas due to them being poorer and due to poorer people tending to live in lower-lying areas. So it's a feedback loop of subjugation and suffering.
Yeah. True that. Okay, next on the list, Extinction Rebellion, ongoing in London. The Extinction Rebellion, which I'm sure most people have heard about, a protest movement that started a couple of years back. This week, starting on Monday, and it's ongoing for 2 weeks, so 2 weeks from this past Monday. They have been holding protests all over the city of London. For instance, we have one here. Protesters descended on Oxford Circus, where they blocked traffic with a giant pink table, danced peacefully, and heard speeches as climate demonstrations in London continue. Earlier, the environmental movement gathered outside the Brazilian embassy to protest deforestation and attacks on indigenous people on the third day of its impossible rebellion. Protests in the capital are due to last for 2 weeks. The Extinction Rebellion is aiming to disrupt business as usual in London with its latest set of demonstrations as the climate crisis unfolds. More than 100 people have been arrested since Monday, the day the action started. So we'll keep you updated on that as it goes along.
Yeah, Extinction Rebellion is definitely a group that we should not uncritically talk about, because it's not explicitly anti-capitalist. It's more reactive than proactive. It's kind of a big tent, trying to be a big tent group seemingly, due to its apprehension towards taking an explicitly anti-capitalist stance. And I've seen criticisms of it in that it has promoted that, like, some of its members have promoted misleading research from people like Guy McPherson, who has put forth flawed estimates of climate apocalypse, like exaggerating the urgency, and that's not helpful. We need to base our climate movement around what the science objectively says, and around an anti-capitalist agenda, and around an anti-colonialist agenda, which means going beyond peaceful protests and embracing militancy. What we need to be doing, of course, is not adventurous acts of violence and vandalism, but strategic militancy. In the same ways that all these successful revolutionaries from Che to Mao to Stalin have used. And I think that here in the United States, we can do that by taking example from the indigenous movements, from the movements led by the colonized, who are, as I've described, are the primary victims of climate collapse. And they are by default the vanguard of the climate movement here.
Yeah, absolutely. The Extinction Rebellion, you can certainly make some big criticisms of. We will. Next on the list, NATO is replicating Nazi Germany's crimes in the Ukraine, August 21st, 2021.
This is one of the articles that I think might have gotten me banned from Medium, because it's such a hot button geopolitical issue. Throughout these last 7 years or so, since the 2014 coup in Ukraine that the US perpetrated, there's been this perpetual push by the media to kind of implicitly glorify the government there. They never talk about the policies of this government too much. All that they want us to know is that Putin is supposedly completely in the wrong. There's nothing to explain his actions besides pure imperialist belligerence. And I don't view Russia as imperialist, not even after the Soviet era. In reality, the U.S. empire is the only empire that we need to be worried about in relation to Ukraine. It's the U.S. that installed an illegitimate government there that is, in effect, a neo-Nazi regime. From the start, it's been torturing dissidents, it's been carrying out pogroms against Romas, it's been persecuting Jews, the LGBT community, journalists, the 1/3 of the Ukrainian population that is ethnically Russian. And this is part of NATO's agenda to cleanse Ukraine of its Russian heritage and make Ukraine into an effective launching pad for NATO's proxy war against Ukraine. And this proxy war is currently intensifying due to Poland, Lithuania, other European powers directly exercising military drills in partnership with the Ukrainian Nazi regime. And NATO has more than ever come to have a role in militarizing Ukraine. They're indoctrinating, training these children to become part of the army. It's seemingly identical to the Hitler Youth. And we have this situation where these neocons are glorifying this regime that has been credibly accused of all the atrocities which the US empire falsely accuses the DPRK of. In my article, I cite these testimonies from 2 individuals within Ukraine post-coup who have been tortured by the regime for associating with, in any way, speaking out against this extreme right-wing agenda.
Yeah. Ukraine, it's best to understand it if you understand some of the history of Ukraine. Ukraine has not ever really been a country up until 1992, when it became the first time ever that it became a country. And prior to that, for a long, long time, for a lot of its history, it was split between the western half and the eastern half. The eastern half was Russian speaking. They were Russian, many of them Russian people, Russian ethnicity. And the western half was, and so religiously they were, if they were religious, they were Orthodox religion, whereas the western half was Catholic. It was for a long, long time under the Lithuanian Empire, or under the Lithuanian Polish Confederacy, for a long period of time. So there's a split in NATO, and basically what NATO, I mean, in Ukraine, and basically what the Ukrainian government, which right now, and since the coup in 2014, that was orchestrated by the American CIA, what they've been trying to do is ethnically cleanse the entire eastern half of the country. That's what this is really about, ethnic cleansing. They've been, and as a result, something like 1.5 million ethnic Russian, mostly ethnic Russian, but others as well, refugees have fled into Russia. Imagine Russia, a place of about less than 150 million people, and it gets 1.5 million people that they've got to house and educate and deal with, and give jobs to pretty much overnight since 2014. So it's really a dire situation. And the way they're ethnic cleansing the eastern half of NATO is through massive bombing campaigns from the Kiev, from the western side of the country. So given that context, the Nazi regime, as you call it, is and the U.S.-backed regime is there's no possible way to support it unless you lie about it, and that's what the American government does. They lie about it. So finally on the list, the U.S. empire wants to create climate collapse. August 19th, Rainer Shea.
Climate collapse is not inevitable, and a collapse of our civilization is not inevitable. This is the narrative that it is inevitable is, I think, partly contributed to by unnecessarily doomist first world environmentalists, like the author of the famous climate paper, Deep Adaptation, Jem Bendell. There are a lot of flaws in his analysis. He cherry picks data to support his narrative that a full-on collapse of our society is unavoidable at this point. But the thing is, if the capitalist state here is not overthrown, if the technocrats behind the US military, the US capitalist class, are allowed to continue carrying out their designs, his dire predictions are going to come true. So it'll kind of be a self-fulfilling prophecy, where if the US left continues to accept these doomist narratives as true, its destiny is going to be, its perceived destiny is going to come true. We're going to be the architects of our own design by failing to sufficiently organize against this threat of engineered capitalist, imperialist, colonialist collapse. And by this, I mean fail to take example from the colonized, the climate movement of the colonized, fail to take example from these liberation movements like the ones that have liberated China and Cuba and so forth. If we keep engaging in passive manifestations of resistance and don't embrace militancy, don't embrace dialectical materialism, which says that climate collapse is not inevitable, well, what are we going to get? Full-on collapse, just like the doomists have always predicted. And this is what the US military seems to want. This is what the US military has said that it expects. In internal documents, internal training videos, the US military has portrayed it as inevitable that massive unemployment, additional climate-created pandemics, internal conflicts, essentially civil war, are going to break out within this country, along with the countrywide power grid collapses. These are the kinds of things that the US military anticipates, and it anticipates these things because this is simply the logical direction that neoliberalism is going.
Yes. It certainly is not inevitable, this climate collapse, although it does loom in the future if we don't do anything. What we need to do now is a lot more than what we're doing. That's for damn sure. The latest IPCC report is pretty dire. It's the most dire report that they've had out yet. It came out 2 weeks ago, and it predicts, even with the best possible scenario, that we'll still have something between 6 and 10 feet rise in the oceans around us, which means either that that a lot of land will be swallowed up, and this is just between now and the end of the century, so another 80 years. We'll have a large part of the coastal areas, which basically is a whole hell of a lot of America, because America's surrounded all on the East Coast by the Atlantic, all on the West Coast by the Pacific, all on the southern coast by the Gulf of Mexico, and all like halfway across the United States on the northern coast by the Great Lakes, all of which are going to rise that 6 to 10 feet. Greater tornadoes, greater hurricanes, more and more devastating wildfires around the country. So we really do have to do something about it. And unfortunately, the pretty much under the current economic system, capitalism, it's not going to happen. The EU is a little bit less severe than the Americans are, but still, even in the EU, they really aren't doing what they need to do. They really aren't taking this seriously and making the technological changes and the organizational changes necessary to really beat back this great climate catastrophe that's looming in our not too distant future. So anyway, with that, that's the end of our show tonight. Want to thank you, Rainer, for everything you do. Stupendous work as always. Want to thank the watchers and listeners for watching and listening. Please come back again next week when we'll have another episode. And until then, I'll leave you with the words of Shakespeare, who said, "I bid you a sweet adieu."